Here's a question nobody asks out loud. What if the years that look like failure are actually the work? You know the feeling. You're at a dinner, a reunion, a conversation where someone mentions their mortgage, their title, their 5-year plan that's actually happening. And you nod, you smile, you say the right things, but on the inside, there's a weight you don't know how to name. Not envy, exactly. Something quieter and harder to shake. The feeling that you are somehow, despite everything you've tried, everything you've started and abandoned and rebuilt, behind. Today, we're going to challenge that feeling, not with optimism, not with motivational language, with psychology. Because what happens in the brain of a man who finds his footing late turns out to be one of the most interesting stories in developmental science. There is an invisible schedule most people carry without knowing it. Psychologists call it the social clock, a set of culturally embedded timelines that tell you when certain things should happen. Degree by 22, career stability by 27, house, partner, direction by 30. And if you haven't checked those boxes, society assigns you a label, the generous version, still finding himself. The less generous version hasn't figured it out yet. Here's what makes the social clock so powerful. You don't have to believe in it for it to affect you. It operates through comparison, and comparison is automatic. The brain is constantly running a background check. Where am I relative to the people around me? Am I ahead? Am I behind? Am I on track? And for men who don't fit the standard timeline, that background process runs constantly, quietly, exhaustingly. But here's the first thing psychology tells us about this. The social clock is real. Its pressure is real. Its effects on self-perception are real. What it is not is accurate. There's a question men in this position often get from the people who love them. Why can't you just stick with it? The job isn't that bad. The money is fine. And they're right. The job isn't bad. The money is fine. But every morning there's something, not a thought, more like a physical sensation that makes showing up feel like putting on a suit that belongs to someone else. Psychologist Festinger described what happens when a person's actions consistently contradict their core values as cognitive dissonance. In its mild form, it's uncomfortable. In its sustained form, over months and years, it's corrosive. The man who jumps between paths, who starts things and leaves them, who can't explain why stability feels like suffocation, is not weak. He is sensitive in the precise psychological sense. His internal signal system is calibrated tightly enough that it refuses to let him ignore the mismatch between where he is and where he should be. Carl Jung put it more bluntly. A man forced to live inside an identity that doesn't fit him will eventually pay a price. Not always loudly. Sometimes the price is just a slow draining. A life that looks functional from outside but feels increasingly hollow from within. The job hopping, the abandoned projects, the restless searching. It isn't dysfunction. It's a compass working exactly as it should. Here's the part almost nobody considers. While the delay looks like stagnation from the outside, something very specific is happening inside. Psychologist Tolman studied a phenomenon he called latent learning, the discovery that the brain learns deeply and durably, even when there is no visible reward, no diploma, no external confirmation that learning is occurring. The brain, it turns out, doesn't need recognition to build knowledge. It builds it anyway. Every failed startup becomes a detailed map of how not to structure a team. Every job that didn't fit teaches something about what conditions allow a person to actually perform. Every rejection from the market is a data point that a business school case study can't replicate. Men who follow conventional paths early develop deep expertise in one lane. Men who move through multiple environments, failures, and redirections develop something different. They develop a systems understanding, a feel for how things actually work that can only come from contact with how they actually fail. That's not a consolation. That's a structural advantage that takes time to build. But knowledge alone doesn't explain the late breakthrough. There's something else. The brain is wired for comfort. When a project collapses, when rejection arrives, when the path closes, the first impulse is always to restore comfort, to blame something, avoid something, explain it away. Men who experience sustained difficulty over years eventually lose the ability to do this effectively, not because they give up, because reality doesn't let them. and what happens when avoidance fails as a strategy, when you've tried enough times to know that looking away doesn't make the problem smaller, is that a different capacity develops. Psychologists call it distress tolerance, the ability to stay present with something painful, look at it clearly, extract what it's actually telling you, and act anyway. This doesn't come from reading about resilience. It comes from failing enough times that failure loses its catastrophic quality. At some point, and this is the shift that changes everything, the man who has failed significantly looks at a new risk and his brain says, "We've been in worse places than this. We survived. This is just another problem." That shift from failure as catastrophe to failure as data is irreversible. Once it happens, it fundamentally changes what a person is capable of attempting. Something interesting tends to happen in the late 30s and early 40s. Men who followed smooth, conventional paths early begin to encounter a specific kind of crisis. They look at what they've built and notice a gap between the life they constructed and the life they actually wanted. This is what's commonly called a midlife crisis. But psychologically, it's more specific than that. It's the moment when a person who deferred their identity questions realizes they can't defer them any longer. Now consider the man who didn't follow the smooth path. He spent his 20s and early 30s in exactly that confrontation. He asked those questions under pressure, without the safety net of a stable title or a defined trajectory. He already knows the answers, or at least he knows himself well enough to know what to stop pretending about. By his late 30s, something else has happened too. The social clock, that relentless background pressure of comparison, has lost its volume, not because he stopped caring what people think, but because he has enough evidence about his own values and capacity that external benchmarks no longer define his self-assessment. Psychologist Albert Bandura called the foundation of true confidence self-efficacy, and he was specific about where it comes from. Not from encouragement, not from potential, from mastery experiences, from the accumulated evidence of having faced something difficult and found a way through. The man who has that evidence, who carries years of actual survival behind him, brings a quality to his work that is genuinely different from someone who hasn't been tested in the same way. Quieter, more decisive, less distracted by the need for external validation. Here's where it can still go wrong. Many men who finally find their footing, who step into clarity after years of difficulty, carry one last thing that undermines what they've built: regret. They look back at the decade of searching and call it wasted. They compare the timeline of their breakthrough to the timelines of men who found stability early and conclude they lost something they can never get back. That framing is a mistake. And not just emotionally, it's factually inaccurate. The failures were not detours from the journey. They were the journey. Every wrong environment taught something about the right one. Every abandoned path proved the internal compass was working, correctly rejecting what didn't fit. Every difficult year built the specific kind of resilience that cannot be developed any other way. The man who reframes his past this way isn't engaging in self-deception. He's reading his own history accurately, perhaps for the first time. So here's the psychological portrait of the man who succeeds late. He spent years in cognitive dissonance, refusing to build his life on a foundation that didn't fit, even when the pressure to do so was immense. He accumulated latent knowledge, a systems-level understanding of how things work and fail that conventional paths don't teach. He developed genuine distress tolerance, not as a philosophy but as a practiced capacity, built through repeated contact with failure. He arrived at midlife with his identity questions already answered, while men around him were beginning to ask them for the first time. And he built his confidence on the only foundation that holds under pressure: actual evidence of survival. None of this is a guarantee. None of this is inevitable. But for the man in the middle of the difficulty, who is watching people move ahead, who is asking what he missed, who is wondering if the struggle is ever going to resolve, the answer the psychology suggests is this: you are not behind. You are in the middle of a process that looks like delay from outside and looks like building from within. The difference between those two descriptions is not optimism. It is accuracy. The question worth sitting with isn't whether you're moving slower than the people around you. That question assumes the race you're in is the same race they're in. It probably isn't. The question worth asking is simpler and harder. Are you building something solid, even when it's invisible to everyone, including yourself? Or are you rushing to put up a structure that looks stable but won't hold when the wind picks up? The men who answer that question honestly, who choose the slow foundation over the fast appearance, don't always win early, but what they build tends to last. And when it finally arrives, it arrives with a clarity and a weight that early success almost never carries. If this video describes something you've been living, share it with someone who needs to hear it named. And subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the behaviors, the patterns, the things about being human that nobody explains.